Hello. So, back again. So, obviously, today is the 26th, and yesterday on the 25th, this won't go up till the 2nd of August, but yesterday on the 25th, we had a live that went down very, very well. Went for 2.5 hours. Everyone seemed to enjoy it. The chat was filled with things. I loved it. So, this is for next week, because obviously, right now, it's like 20 to 1. And what the topic of conversation was Mbappe v Yamal. The one that's up right now is how to build a football team. So I figured, obviously I've not seen the reaction yet. I'm recording this, right? But my anticipation is that the most contentious part of that video in terms of how to build a team will be based around the number 9 position. Mainly frontline, but number 9 position. So I prefer false nines, connector types, things like that. And I prefer that to the traditional striker. I have for a long time. I think we're coming up on like 6, 7, 8 years of this now. And I just think it's the most optimal way to build your football side for winning at the highest level. So I've not seen the reaction to that video, but like I said, I imagine it will be the most contentious part. So I figured best to expand upon it because there's also just a lot of room to maneuver in terms of that topic. So I'm just going to jump right into the video. So yeah, no preamble this time. I'm rather tired today, so there's not as much waffling capacity here today. We'll see how long this goes. I've only got 5 pages worth of notes. This is won't be one of my longer ones. I don't anticipate this going much longer than 40 minutes. But I said that about the boxing video last time, and I said it won't go beyond 20, and it went to over 30. So we'll have to see. So look, I think I should give some pre-background on this. So first of all, why do I think that it will be the most contentious part? So a lot of people reduce football strictly to the roles that they have in their mind, right? So they think a goalkeeper's sole role is to stop shots. They think a fullback's sole job is to defend. They think that a winger's job is to create. They think that a striker's job is strictly to score goals. They don't think they should be involved in other areas, right? Which is a common criticism that you hear of some of these false nines and things like that. And some of them are valid, but some of them are also invalid because at the end of the day, some of it relies on team dynamics and how the team's set up, and then ultimately what's just best for the guy as a player to maximize him. So that model in terms of viewing the game in general is generally suboptimal today, but there are certain benefits to it still if you really want to say that. But I think on the whole, it's generally not ideal because of how multifunctional the game has turned into today. So I'm going to talk to just the false nine striker part of it today, and it's going to be offensively. I understand part of the modernization of the game is that all 11 of your players are defensive cogs and all 11 of your players are offensive cogs. I'm not going to talk about the defensive workload and press rate of the false nine relative to the striker, because at the end of the day, if the intensity is there, the intensity is there. It has nothing to do with what the coach does and how the guy approaches it and whether they're a false nine or a striker. If they press, they press. Haaland presses, Dembele presses. It's the same, right? I will expand on those two later. So I don't really care for that. So that's not going to be the topic. So in terms of, we're not talking about the unique guys when we talk about this, right? We're not talking about the guys who are just total football unicorns, right? So with that, we're not talking about Benzema from 21 to his final 2 years in Madrid, which is probably his peak, or 3 years, whatever you want to say it, or like say, what would that be? Year 13 and 14 or whatever it was. We're not talking about Pep's version of Messi. We're not talking about Neymar when he played false nine under Tuchel and Poch in Poch's first 6 months anyway. We're not talking about peak Suarez. We're not talking about peak Henry. We're not talking about Brazilian Ronaldo. We're not talking about these guys who are just total unicorns who create, they connect, they help control the attacks and their physical anomalies and things like that. That is an unfair comparison because ultimately, if we talk about those guys, then they just are better than everyone else anyway. So it's a ridiculous comparison. I'm talking about the guys who are a tick below. So I'm talking about the guys who are a false nine versus the guy who are a traditional nine. So this base example isn't necessarily contemporary, but say Roberto Firmino against Ibrahimovic. Firmino is better than Ibrahimovic for a top-level team. He just is. He's a better football player. He's more impactful upon winning. Dembele against Haaland, if we want to go more contemporary, as in today. Or if you want to go Benzema, even pre-2021, so before he really had the slight uptick in goal scoring. Or even if you want to say Benzema 13 to 17, so the season under Carlo And then the seasons with Zidane, and if you want to include the half season with Benitez, you can, but just include those versus Lewandowski. So why are the first three? No. So why are the A side of those comparisons always better than the B side? That's the type of argument that we're going to be going to. So should do a slight disclaimer, because I know that one of you smartasses are going to talk about that dreaded Englishman who used to play at White Hart Lane and now plays in Germany. Harry Kane's not a false nine. He is a traditional nine who masquerades as a false nine, because the sole trait and attribute of a guy who is a false nine is not simply you drop deep and you slap passes further. Ibrahimovic is actually more of a false nine than Harry Kane is. Better combination play, better range of passing. His IQ and touch and feel is far better than Kane, but he's certainly a traditional nine, and Kane is more of a traditional nine than he is. He just thinks he's something else, which is ridiculous. And ultimately, he's simply not that, and it's really curtailed his value in the latter part of his career in terms of a winning player. So a false nine is someone who can take the ball on the turn. There's someone who can face play, they can initiate play, they can sharpen and initiate combinations, they can help you control the attack and the flow, they can alter the pace of the game. There's someone who can bend the game to their will in terms of tempo setting and kicking things into action and things like that. It doesn't just have to be goal scoring. Obviously, that is a benefit, and all of these guys had various seasons where they were top-level goal scorers. Firmino had a season where he had 27. Dembele just had a season where he's coming off 30. Benzema had a season where I'm sure he scored 30 for Madrid in that little time frame. If not, at least he scored 20-something. All of these guys, they have the capacity to score goals, but that is not the primary function of their role. Now, this does not mean that they are the absolute key to their team's attacks. Dembele obviously is the head of the snake for PSG, but Firmino wasn't, and neither was Benzema. They were playing in a role to function as part of a greater unit of the team, and that is ultimately what we're talking about here, to give your team the maximal chance of winning. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're always better than these guys. They usually are, but it just means that they are more impactful upon winning. Now, if you're more impactful upon winning, does that mean you're a better football player? I think so. Not everyone agrees, but that's an entirely separate conversation. So, now it comes to how I think we should initially look at this is if we look at the best teams from the last 15 years. So I would say, so we're going to use the Champions League. If you really want to include the 2012 Real Madrid team, you can, because obviously that iteration didn't win a Champions League. But if you really want to include them, you can, but I'm not going to for the purpose of this exercise. So of the 15 Champions League winners, I think 8 of the teams are genuinely all-world teams. So 25 PSG, fantastic. 24 Real Madrid, I don't think they are. 23 Manchester City, obviously are. 22 Real Madrid, same as 24. 21, no. 21 Chelsea, no, they're not an all-time team. 20 Bayern, they can class them as an all-time team. They're fantastic. 19 Liverpool, they're an all-time team. You can pick the iteration of Madrid. I'm picking 17 of the three-peats, but ultimately they're all the same in terms of how they function with that false nine type. But I'm going to just pick 17. That team was also just better. They managed to win the league as well, things like that. 15 Barcelona, 14 Real Madrid, and 11, 25, 23, 20. That's 3, 19, 17, 15. That's 6. I'm tired. I've got a headache. I've got to count. And then 14, 11. That's 8 teams, right? So of those 8 teams, we're going to scratch 2 of them. So 2015 Barca and 2011 Barca. Why? They had 2011 Messi and 2015 Suarez. We are not including those guys in the debates because ultimately the reason that they could play quality football to a high level was not just because they were false nines, it is because these guys are some of the greatest players to ever grace a football pitch. So then if we look at the other ones, so 25, 23, 20, 19, 17 and 14. So that whittles us down to 6 teams. So if we go 25 with Dembele, he's a false 9. 19 with Firmino, false 9. 17, 14 with Benzema, false 9. Because ultimately, he was not scoring this gluttony of goals yet, so I'm comfortable putting him in this bracket. 23, Haaland. 20, Levy. So, 4-2 in favour of the teams without a recognised goal-scoring glutton number 9, right? So, instantly that tick for them. But that isn't the reason why. So, in 20, People talk about Lewandowski and he scored a bunch of goals. Fine, he did. Lewandowski did not have mass impact on Bayern Munich winning those games post the Chelsea tie. Against Barcelona, when they slapped them 8-2, I don't think he scored until goal number 5. He generally wasn't very good in that. He was fine. He was okay. In the semis against Lyon, he put the icing on the cake. And then against PSG, he was anonymous. He was a disgrace in that showing. 23, City. So Haaland had a very good run up until the semi-finals. No, up until the final, sorry. He was actually good in the semi-finals. So people talk about him in the quarters, and he was very, very good, taking advantage of the upper Meccano mistakes. People criticize him for the semis. Ultimately, he caused so much havoc, and he caused the spaces to open up for the other guys. So, that is actually part of it. I'm going to expand upon that later. So, Dembele, Firmino, Benzema all were hugely integral pieces of their teams making the Champions League final and ultimately winning the final. Obviously, the year before, Firmino was huge in terms of Liverpool getting to the final as well. 4 of the 6 teams had a great false 9, and only 2 of the 6 had a good traditional 9, and only one of those 2 had a very good run in terms of your actual thing. Raw goal scoring numbers does not equate to you being a fantastic, impactful guy. He was very good in the league, Lewandowski, but his value in terms of Champions League was very overstated. I believe there are quite a few strikers you could put in place of him that season, and Bayern Munich still win the Champions League. Do they win everything? Probably not, because Lewandowski is a fantastic league striker. But do they win the Champions League with someone else in there? Yeah, I believe so. So, why are these guys better? So, first of all, you give an extra body to the midfield, right? Because these top-level false 9s, often, they are either guys who they play off mass instinct, or they're guys who are super comfortable centrally, or they're super smart. Usually it's 2 of the 3. So, Firmino, Benzema, Dembele, what do? They always drop deeper. They end up forcing a diamond in the midfield. Last week, I ended up doing dots on my head and dotting it around and using my face as a tactics board, right? I'm not going to do that this time. But ultimately, you can still get the picture, right? Because the false 9, he drops a bit deeper. He gives them an extra passing option. So what does that end up doing? Bada bing, they come down here, extra passing option. So now it creates a diamond and it's an overload. Usually most teams defend with 3. Usually most teams operate with 3-man midfield. Sometimes it's a double pivot of 2 with the 10 dropping in deeper. Ultimately, if you have 4 against their 2 or 3, and then now the centre-backs have to decide whether to venture out or stay dropping deep, ultimately what does that do? That causes confusion. What does the confusion do? Let your wingers attack the full-back and the centre-back at the same time and get in the spaces between. So that ends up causing a sort of a diamond, except the strikers aren't as narrow and they're far wider, and it ends up causing several difficulties for the opposition coaches, and it just lets them attack and go at the guys. You're dropping deep, you end up enforcing the team to have a greater degree of possession, and it opens up spaces for the guys beyond you. Fairly basic, right? We've heard this concept. This isn't anything new to a lot of you, right? We've heard about it with Firmino, we've heard about it with Benzema, we've heard it to a lesser degree with Cristiano Ronaldo, in terms of taking advantage of the spaces that Rooney would take up. Tevez would also make runs beyond. So this allows you to control play. If it's a normal 9, if you're going to control and dictate play to the same flow, you need to have 2 wingers who are extremely comfortable on the ball. That's why Grealish, and that's why whoever that right side of midfielder would end up being, was hugely valuable to Manchester City. Because when they come in, they're not necessarily looking to take you on the outside. They're not going to come in, they're not going to do something low percentage. They're going to come in, help circulate the ball, keep pinning the team in the opposition back. Sometimes they'll cross it, but it's usually an in-swinger. And a lot of the times when that comes out, it's either it's either causing mass danger, heading it out for a throw-in or a crossing, and because of the fact that you're circulating the ball so well, and you have a flat line of 4, and you have the 2 guys behind you often squeeze up, and that ends up into a 6, and it just makes it up into an extremely difficult thing, and now you're choking out the opposition. Then, that ultimately is fine, but at the same time, you are now reliant on the 9, because these same guys who have to be very comfortable in possession, they usually aren't the most dynamic athletically, and they usually aren't the most vicious ball strikers. So as a result, what ends up happening is so now you are overly reliant on the number 9. So what happens then is you get a Manchester City in 2023 situation where all the attention is on top of Erling Haaland. So now what do you need? You need someone who can break it. You need someone who has an element of violence, who can come in and take advantage of that. City lacked that for large stretches in the bigger games when Kevin De Bruyne wasn't there. We saw the Champions League final. De Bruyne goes out, and now ultimately you lack an element of threat because Haaland, he can only do so much because he is reliant on the service. He is a very good self-generator in terms of his movement, but he still needs someone to get him the ball. And ultimately, if you have 3 guys on one body, and it opens the space for the others, but they're not comfortable finishing, you need someone to take advantage of that. De Bruyne was that, and he's the thing which made Manchester City so unstoppable. Because he opened up everything else. He would take advantage of the space left for Haaland. He's one of the freakiest, most athletic, dynamic ball strikers that we've seen. So he would take advantage of it. And that is a big degree of why that 23 Manchester City team, before De Bruyne ripped his hamstring in half, was such an impossible team to deal with. We saw the Champions League final with Inter. That is ultimately what limited them. So in settled play, what it ends up doing is, if you have a central reference point, that was to do with settled play, right? Even in counters though, when you have a guy who is a central reference point for those counters, and he can turn, and he can face play, and he can drive, and he can pass, and he can connect, and he can play those through balls, and he can initiate combinations with those other guys, what that ends up doing is, it ends up unleashing you on counters. So, PSG, you have Dembele, and then you have Kvara and Doué or Barcola running beyond. That opens up so many angles. Whether you want to talk about Liverpool with Mane and Salah, or you want to talk about Madrid with Cristiano and Bale, even if you want to talk about the 2012 version of Madrid, you have Di Maria and Cristiano going beyond Benzema. Or you can even use Ozil if you really want to. If you want to go even a little bit further back, 2009 Barca, who did they have? They had Sami Eto'o as one of the wide men, and you had Thierry Henry as the other wide man, because Messi was the guy in the middle. And what that ended up bringing violent, beautiful football. Obviously, Messi and Eto'o would end up interchanging quite often, but nonetheless, Messi was the false nine for large stretches. And if you want to go with that United team in 2008, the Champions League winner the year before, what did we end up getting? And obviously, I understand we're using Messi there. He broke the rule, still play with it. But now we're going to go back a year before. Wayne Rooney was the central number 9 for Manchester United. Carlos Tevez on the right side, Cristiano Ronaldo on the left side. Or right, left. Sometimes they interchange. Sometimes Ronaldo was on the right, sometimes Tevez was on the left. Again, counters, transition. Guys who could turn, face, connect, things like that. That ends up giving you the space on the counters. These are central players who can turn, they can run, they're dynamic with the football. And that ends up giving you the best. It gives you the most different and varied points of attack and things like that. What that ends up doing is it just makes you extremely lethal. Obviously, like, the thing with the 9 is it gives you, if they're world-class anomalies, they don't need other guys to support them in getting the ball up the pitch. Say a guy like a Drogba, a guy like a Van Persie, those types of guys, even an Ibrahimovic to a certain degree, but they do still need those guys up alongside them to bring in, right? The thing about the false 9 is they can drop deep, they can take the ball, and then they can just run with it. They can just take it, pick it up, and drive with it, spray it out wide, drive. They can usually make the run beyond. They're not going to necessarily finish the move all the time, but what they end up doing is they end up squaring the pass. They end up making the pass before the pass. They're such a valuable, lethal cog in any single system, so you don't have to supply the guys much. It is absolutely, it's the best type of number 9 that you can get. People always talk about these, people always want the goal-scoring number 9, and that's fine, and I understand that. I understand the appeal to it, but if you have a guy who can just take the ball, run with it, and is a footballer and has a footballer's mind, and you get a guy who can run beyond and can finish off those chances from a wider position, and he can also dribble, and he can also create, you just have the most multifunctional footballers, and you can end up having guys who can interchange and work around each other. It's wonderful. Multi-flex just gives you more flexibility in terms of the roles to attack, and it makes you better in possession, and to be honest, it can even make you better out of possession, because a lot of the time, strikers can sometimes be lazy, or wingers can sometimes be lazy, but you can hide those wingers better than you can hide those strikers, I believe. It allows you to fill out the side better with better, more dynamic attacks. It just gives you more options going forward. And also the other thing is because you can get multiple different types of forwards, because these types of strikers tend to be able to play with just about anyone. Whether it's a ball-to-feet type of guy, whether it's a runner-beyond type of guy, whether it's a guy who's slow and he wants to dictate the attacks type of guy, they can also help and interchange with that, because a lot of the time, these guys are super mobile too. They give you options to do so many different things on a football pitch, and so many different things from a tactical and schematic standpoint. It just means that you are in the best, it just means that you're in the absolute best state to win football matches on a regular basis. Now, of course, like with anything, you can't just drop him there and expect there to just make magic happen. You need certain types of players around him to optimize that and platform them and give them the best conditions. But it's the same for a traditional number 9. So at the end of the day, if you're going to take one guy who needs certain conditions and you need the other guy who needs certain conditions, but this other guy, if you give him those certain conditions and he can be part of a cog and he can work with these other guys, what ends up happening is he can help you elevate the team to a far higher level than this guy who more than likely raise your floor. He can take you from 55 to 70, maybe 75, but he's going to struggle to take you from 75 to 95. The false 9 guy can take you from 75 to 95 just with his presence alongside the other guys. Let's take Mane, Salah, and Firmino, right? You swap out Bobby Firmino and you put in Ibrahimovic. Mane and Salah are both worse. Because Mane is not a natural creator. Salah has a wonderful final ball, but he's better when he's hitting runners in behind. Salah's goal output would absolutely go down. His combination play with Ibrahimovic would be very good, but that's about it. So ultimately, the other guys are worse. Your team is worse because of the fact that now your two best players, because Mane and Salah are both better than Ibrahimovic, they're both worse now because of the fact that you need to funnel things through this guy. So what ends up happening? Liverpool go from a 97, 99 point team, and they're probably down at like an 80 to 85 point team now. And ultimately, that ends up suffocating the value of everyone else. We can actually use Liverpool this season as a good example. If you have a false 9 type next to Salah, a guy who can connect, a guy who can do a bit of everything and is mobile and is smart, let's forget Isak, right? Because it looks like Isak is going to be on his way, right? Let's say you get Ekitike in there. Ekitike, by all accounts, I can't say I've watched a huge amount of him since he's left Paris, but is a guy who can connect, who can create, is a guy who's smart, he's a footballer, right? For lack of a better term, right? He's very good at all those different things. So what ends up happening when you have that guy and you put him next to a Mo Salah? He ends up creating, he ends up doing the things which help maximize Mo Salah. And so ultimately, I think you add his presence in there. Liverpool go from they finish on an 84, they were on a 90-point pace for a large portion of the season. They probably go up to a 95, 98-point pace. But if you drop in let's say, who's a big stiff number 9 today? Well, I say stiff, that's harsh. Let's say you get Lewandowski in there. Now, especially because he can't really move as well anymore, unless you say you can give him 40 healthy games in the season, or maybe even 50. I think Liverpool's points tally drops from, I think their projected points tally before they quit the end of the season, it goes from 90 plus, and probably stay about 80 the entire season. They still win the league because Arsenal were pathetic this season, but nonetheless, I think that it would have hampered them and made them a worse overall side in terms of the production that you got out of everyone else, because of the fact that now you're not maximising the guys that are truly your best players. So that's ultimately why you end up, if you maximise your best players, it ends up doing it. Now, obviously, there are some exceptions. If you're stacked to the gills, right, you have Haaland and you have De Bruyne types. If you have, say, a Lewandowski and you also have a Neymar, for example, then you're fine. If you have two guys who are bona fide, certified, top 5 players, fine. Like, these rules don't necessarily apply to you because normally those two guys aren't the exact same profiles. Only Madrid are silly enough to do that with Mbappe and Vinny, but generally they don't play the same. PSG were as well when they had Messi and Neymar, that's not the point. Generally they don't play the same way. They don't operate in the same zones. They like to play off of each other. They have a symbiotic relationship. And what ends up happening there is you end up thriving and these two end up working together in conjunction. But normally you can only have one or the other. If you're going to have one or the other, go with the false 9 because of the fact that you probably can't build around them in the same way that, say, a Haaland can be built around with a Kevin De Bruyne, things like that. So, yeah, that's my piece on the whole false 9 in terms of why I prefer it. If that can't have been like 25 minutes, like this is certainly one of my shorter ones. What else is happening? You know what? I will cover some transfers. So, Gyokeres, I think I covered him in my return episode. He's a very good... The idea of him sounds very good, right? I also just don't think a flop. Like, by all accounts, you know, by people whose opinions that I value, they don't think he's very good. Now, they think that he's someone who is bound to flop. But what does flop mean in this context, right? So he's just scored 97 goals in like 100 games for Sporting. That averages out to 48.5 goals per season or something ridiculous like that. Either way, let's say he's averaged over 45 goals a season for Sporting. That is ridiculous. If he even gives you 50% of that production, that is a 23 goal a season striker, more or less. 22 and a half, let's round up. Let's just say 23, because that's the number smack bang in the middle. Fine. 23 goals a season in all competitions for a 50-goal striker. No, for a 50-game a season striker. Is it ideal? No. Does it probably get Arsenal over the top next to everything else they've dealt with? It might do. I'm not sure, but it certainly puts them in better stead. And because of the price of Gyokeres, it also leaves them with money to go out and sign other players, right? Let's say if you can somehow, I don't think they will because he's shown no indication of wanting to leave. Let's say you can turn Rafa Leao's head. Like all of a sudden you have Gyokeres being created for by Leao and Saka. And these are two, that is actually where it could work, the dynamic of a traditional number 9, because both Saka and Leao are comfortable coming inside and playing in possession. Except they're also very comfortable going on the outside and whipping across into the box. Now you have the best of both worlds, right? And because they're super smart, they're super technical, and they're very gifted physically, especially Leao. Or even let's say you get a Rodrigo in. Rodrigo still gives you that same degree of security in possession, even though he doesn't give you the same zip on the outside. But the point remains. So you get him bouncing passes off of him, and now Gyokeres all of a sudden can work. I think that it's fairly reasonable to expect him to score 30 goals in all competitions, and that's ultimately... Arsenal haven't had that since Aubameyang. So we're talking about a 5-year gap here, and that'd be very valuable. So, and then Liverpool. So people keep crying about Liverpool's transfer. They're saying there needs to be some PSR thing. So let's run through these, the last few windows, fine. So 23-24, they signed McAllister, Szoboszlai, Gravenberch. They signed Gakpo in the winter of that year. And they signed Endo. So I think they signed 4 midfielders. They might have signed someone else, but I don't quite recall. Ultimately, that 100 million plus bid on Caicedo, that money didn't go anywhere. That money was just sat there. So that was just sat there in a treasure chest. If we assume, and because ultimately, right, the number that I've seen is that they can spend 500 million and still be PSR compliant, right? I don't understand PSR. I rely on other people to do the nerdy stuff for me, and I pick it up from them. The same with the salary cap in the American sports. They spend, let's assume that they have 150 million per window to spend, right? So even though it's not because they spent more in that season before, they spent like 150, but let's assume, because they were going to have a 250 million outlay somewhere. But let's assume that every season since post that one, they had 150 million. So they had 100 million from the season before. They have 150 million on last year's window, where they spent nothing. Their sole acquisition was Federico Chiesa for less than 15 million English. Like, they didn't buy anyone the entire summer, basically. So, and let's assume they have 150 million for this summer, right? That is over 400 million. That's like 435 million English. And they're looking to sell Luis Diaz. He will fetch them about 70 English. Jeremy Frimpong. No, not Frimpong. Kwanzaa, he fetched them, I want to say it was 30. Maybe it was 40, but let's call it 30. That's an extra 90 million. So ultimately, 430 plus 90 is 520. That all adds up. And it makes sense just from a common sense standpoint. So I don't understand why people are so upset about this and want an investigation. I just think people got comfortable with the idea because Klopp ultimately didn't spend the same way that they could now. They were just comfortable with the idea that Liverpool always had to sell to buy. Which never made sense to me. Because you get 9 figures for winning the Premier League, I'm pretty sure. Or at least high 8 figures. So ultimately, if you get that, you have money spare. I get it. The stadium, the training ground, blah, blah, blah. Adding the fact that Klopp could do more or less. I just think Klopp was a bit silly when it came to the situation with Jordan Henderson. You get rid of him, you add in a proper midfielder, you probably win the quadruple. Fine, you didn't, but at the same time, let it go. Liverpool, they really had a missed opportunity, but ultimately now they're really taking advantage of it. They just won the league, and they clearly had gaps up front and at fullback, especially at left back, and they've taken care of that. So, we'll take care of it. Can they get Isak through the door? I think they will. Which is really upsetting, because I'm going to owe my little cousin dinner. Yeah, not very good. He said in January that Isak will go to Liverpool, and I said, I'll bet you dinner you won't sign Isak this summer. And he was like, you know what, go on then. He's 16, he doesn't care any different, he doesn't actually care, like, all of his pocket money can just go on whatever, he doesn't care if he has to flitter it away or whatever. So, ultimately, if you get Isak through the door, next to Ekitike, now you have 2 strikers who, okay, they're a bit overlapping and a bit redundant, but Isak's tall, he's very multifunctional. Ekitike is very multifunctional as well. Isak can act as a scorer, Ekitike can play off him. You know, it's looking spooky. And they will need a winger if Diaz goes, but maybe Ekitike is the one, or maybe they just go with a diamond and they end up rotating between Salah, Ekitike, Isak, and Wirtz as the front four. As the front three, all giving each other different fits and spots of rest. You have extra midfielders this week because of Wirtz. Like, Liverpool are in a very good spot now. Like I said, I don't... Like, the Rodrigo link's never made sense to me because he's ball to feet and you've just signed Wirtz, but you get Isak now who can go in behind Ekitike, who can go in behind Salah, who can take more goal scoring responsibility and have less of the creative burden, so he has more juice in the tank at the end of the season. It'll be ridiculous. It's not looking very good. Things like this never work out as they're meant to, so, you know, maybe we'll see this blow up on Liverpool's face, but it's in a very, very precarious spot for the rest of the league, because if they get Isak as well, wow, I'd love to see. We're at half an hour now. I think I can wrap this here. Wow. I think this is the shortest pod one I've done. I think the shortest one before this might have been replacements and coaches. Next week I'm talking about American football. Because by the time that video goes up, it'll be August 9th. And the NFL season will just be 4 Sundays away. So as a result, I want to talk about Tom Brady. Because American football's fun and I really love the sport. I'll talk about the NFL close to the time as well. But hey, that's it for now. I'll speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.